Yeah, it's okay.
What, is that like a carnival and they get people wet in the streets or something?
Yeah. Basically, it's the new. I think it's the New Year, right? It's Songkran is
I think so.
It's the Thai New Year.
Yeah.
But their tradition. It's also when the
old ladies dumping ice buckets.
Hey, Garo, good morning.
It's also basically they made a culture. I don't know, because I think it's the rain is coming after the dry season, so they celebrate by spraying water to everybody on the streets for like a week, like a few days. How are you, Garo?
I'm good. How about you?
Are you here for Songkran or where? I don't even know where you are.
Yeah. No. I'm in Chiang Mai.
Oh, cool.
I'm on the 30-day visa.
Oh, really? Okay.
You should meet up with me later tonight after all the meetings are done. There's some fun stuff happening.
Great.
I could not hear you.
Yeah, it is a little quiet, James.
Sorry, we'll talk later. I think it's the background is trying to cancel out the music that's playing at the cafe.
Okay.
But yeah, Mike, Garo, and I think both got our tickets to ECC. Did you get yours as well?
Would it be an email, you mean, or what?
Yeah. Email sent to Michelini@Chadstone.
Okay, yeah, Michelini. Okay, I'll search. I'm like always a day behind on my email, but I could search for it.
I mean, it's not urgent. I was concerned for like a little while because like the payment went through, but then we didn't receive an email for like 24 hours.
I got the confirmation. It came at 10 p.m. local time last night.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like, it didn't come until like, I guess that would have been like 5 p.m. my time. So like all day I was like, Jesus, did we just like yeet $3,000 or whatever it was?
I thought it was like half the price, max. I didn't know it was that much.
Yeah. It was.
Are they serving Wagyu? I think I already asked you this, but
yeah.
What's the...
No, it's just like it's in, I don't know, like they're French, right? They're doing it in Brussels, you know. I'm sure there will be some adrenochrome consumption or something like that. Anyway.
Oh dear, adrenochrome. You'll get me started on that.
I'm sorry, I didn't get...
What was that?
He didn't hear what you said, and we didn't hear what he said, but we're talking about, a few of Garo, Bo, and I will be attending ECC in Brussels in July, so we just got our tickets. Okay.
Sure. I don't know who else we're waiting on.
I think we just go ahead.
Go ahead and get started.
Yeah, I think we just go ahead. I am recording for the blog, so.
Okay, cool. All right, so this is the different models that like John had sketched up. This idea, you know, and like these constructions, I think, you know, one of the things that I wanted to add to it today are this, like, one is this question of like what a service provider is, and two is like which vault are we talking about when we're talking about like leaky vaults versus, you know, people just like rushing to acquire and redistributing the stake. And so James and I had a call yesterday where we started sketching a little bit more of this into the Figma. And so this is the chart that we're like sort of thinking about right now and adding to, and basically it's like, so to explain this a little bit, you know, we have the Loadpipe DAO here, and then everything horizontal to the Loadpipe DAO are things, are like genres of decisions that the Loadpipe DAO can make. Workflow governance, again, we haven't like gotten into defining quite yet, but this is like sort of in a hand wavy way, just like, you know, sort of like coordinate work streams. Right. So like, and so we would define like a little process in here by which it would assign a coordinate work stream. Or at least that's sort of the way that we're thinking about it. But we started to, you know, and then this is what Loadpipe does, right? Like this, all these things are to support this, which we're beginning to think that like justice should exist. And we talked a little bit about this, I think, at the last Tokenomics meeting, but justice should exist at this protocol level, and all DAOs should be subject to this like protocol level justice. And we started defining what that might look like and what the work, like what the flow is of like a dispute raising, as well as like, you know, asking some questions and starting to define these things. But like we raise a dispute, that creates a case, which selects end jurors, notifies the jurors, and waits for their input. The judges submit verdicts. The verdicts must contain like a judgment must contain a verdict, which the user describing their reasoning, and then before you submit your verdict, you have to vote on other people's verdicts, right? So a simple sort of upvote, downvote system maybe is the easiest way to think about it. And then once the verdict is rendered, we reward correct judges. We, you know, penalize incorrect judges, and then, you know, we can push to the appeals process or just ultimately settle. The appeals process is the one that we sort of outlined, and maybe I should move this over, but like over here, this idea of like quadratic appeals that get increasingly more expensive the more of them you lose is sort of our first thought on like what that justice system should look like. But that's a sketch of, and maybe here I'll actually just reduce this. Oh, no, I don't. I'm just going to bring this whole thing. Maybe I can't. Okay, there we go. Bring this whole thing like over here. But the problem is it's too big and it doesn't reduce everything. Okay, whatever. I'll deal with that later. Either way, it's a little bit closer now. So then we got into like this incentive system, and basically it's like this is based on what we were talking about over here. And so like the way to think about it is the workflow governance flows out of the cash vault, and all this other stuff, the incentive system, the executive decisions, or I guess like just the incentive system is flowing out of the token vault. And then the executive decisions are things like we should be able to kick a marketplace and we should be able to kick a vendor. But these are sort of like the way the token flows are working in our, or like in my mind at least. Like I think tokens should go to vendors. I think tokens should go to judges. I think tokens should go to marketplaces. And I think that we also have this like sort of fuzzy idea of warehousing fulfillment. I think that maybe is, you know, something that either the marketplaces can deal with themselves or can exist as service providers within the Loadpipe ecosystem eventually. I know we've given like zero thought about it. But this to me seems like a final, like these are where the tokens are going. This is what an outflow looks like. Outflows look like tokens to vendors, to judges, to marketplaces, and to warehousing fulfillment. And then marketplaces get those tokens and decide how they're then distributed to vendors and warehousing fulfillment. So it begs this question of like, what is the demand side of these tokens? And that's like sort of here, right? So there's, you know, how do we decide voting power? Like, what is the mechanism by which a token which sits in this token vault or is issued by a smart contract ultimately becomes power to vote in all three of these areas, right? Because it's the same voting power, same vote that decides all three of these like decision genres. And I had sort of outlined that, or at least my thinking on it over here. Sorry, go ahead, Jay.
Can I, just briefly interject just for a clarification point of view, because Bo and I know this because we talked about it, but it's very much hierarchical. And so we're discussing the specific governance for the actions that Loadpipe itself is taking and consequentially like trickling down. So we have the sort of monetary policy, we have the internal operations sort of policy, and then we have, and none of this is the marketplace specific, like the voting. So this is like how Load itself looks.
Well, I mean, to that point, like the, you know, the workflow governance would also like, so this is another question that we have like sort of unanswered, but like we would also have like, you know, all of these genres of decisions would exist at the lower level as well.
So part of this discussion was, I suppose, partially coming up with the distinction of type-specific governance what sort of role Loadpipe would have that is separate from microservices, which isn't really rooted in Struts so much, in the sense that whatever we do at the Loadpipe level, we're probably emulating inside. And yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bo, but it's like the organizational Loadpipe as a middle level protocol, how we're self-managing in a lot of ways, and then how we're managing through proxy or like through rewards or through governance.
I think.
Yeah, I mean, so this is like, again, I'm just saying, like, this DAO should also have some of these components, but we're like trying to I think first about like what does the big picture look like, because we're talking about like this because the token will be issued here. I still haven't I don't have like a good idea of what it means to translate this voting power system down to like Hamza DAO and what Hamza DAO governs, or how that functions in terms of like the staking contract. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, if we create like a governance power here, that governance power should not be this, like, governance power in the Loadpipe ecosystem should not be governance power in the Hamza DAO or any other like sub DAO. And governance power in a sub DAO should not also be governance power in a different sub DAO. And
it's sort of like a secularity, like internally. How is Loadpipe organized its governance outside of marketplaces? And how do we do that far away, right?
So to answer Jose's question, workflow governance at the Loadpipe level is people writing like smart contracts and like doing updates, like software level updates, doing things like creating the mechanisms for warehousing and fulfillment. It's also things like creating teams to monitor the incentive system and the effect of the incentive system. So it's like, it would be like to create a team that makes recommendations to the DAO on how to parameterize the incentive system. So like you create, what work needs to be done at Loadpipe? Well, the voters of Loadpipe need to understand the effects that their decisions are having. They also need to do things like monitor marketplaces and make recommendations to like kick marketplaces or vendors, monitor vendors, right? So like workflows need to be established to pay people to do that sort of work, which is mostly just informing the DAO and making proposals to the DAO of what things should or should not be done. Yes, exactly. So like the workflow governance is something that exists. Yeah, workflow governance at the Hamza DAO level is actually probably a lot more involved than workflow governance at the Loadpipe DAO level, right? Because at the Hamza DAO level, you need to have an entire software engineering team that's like making sure that like the Hamza DAO site is up. They need to probably be running a relay node. Although, again, it could be a team that's focused on running relay nodes at the Loadpipe DAO level. But yeah, I mean, like doing things like building, like monitoring the reputation of smart contracts, like maintaining the indexer, if that's ends up how we end up, or if like that ends up being how we do cross market reputation scores and everything like that, and cross market reviews, then like those are like engineering things that need to happen at the Loadpipe DAO level. But yeah, they function the same way. Like you can think of workflow governance as just like, how do you run a company with a DAO? And workflow governance at the Loadpipe DAO level is like, what company business functions does Loadpipe DAO need to do? And at the Hamza level is like, what company business functions does the Hamza DAO need to do? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it should be ready to use out of the box, but like we're still going to need, it's software development, right? Like there may be unintended consequences. There may be things that need to be fixed. There may need to be feature adds at some point in the future. And so, yeah, I mean, like, the DAO gets to decide what workflows are necessary for its functioning. Right. We're not like
even
go ahead, Mike.
Even Bitcoin is getting upgraded still. People think it doesn't. need to change, but even Bitcoin needs development.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's like an LIP, right? A load pipe improvement proposal, right? Maybe the workflow governance just funds the developers who are working on the core team on improvement proposals to the protocol. But the ultimately, it's like the DAO gets to decide what workflows to establish. And yeah, I mean, like, again, this needs to be fleshed out a little bit more. There's certainly models of what that workflow governance looks like. I forget who I was chatting to about it, but like Shapeshift is a great example. Raid Guild is another great example of like places where they have a treasury and they fund like with Raid Guild, like they fund like RIP, Raid, So like you could look at like what their process is for submitting a raid improvement proposal, or you could look at, no, it's not a Shapeshift stat. It's a Shapeshift snap. And like this is how Shapeshift does its improvement proposals. You could explore there the different like, and they establish like workflows, they call them work streams, right? So like you see they create a proposal to continue funding the engineering work stream at certain intervals. And that's sort of what that would look like. And yeah, so at a certain point, it could be that there are no workflows of Loadpipe DAO. That Loadpipe DAO is just working, and no like actual like business work needs to be done. Instead, the only thing that the voters need to vote on is like the parameters of the incentive system, or whether or not to kick a vendor or kick a marketplace. Although again, I would say that like in the MakerDAO example, which I didn't give, but like MakerDAO has like a risk team that's constantly evaluating the collateralization ratio of the system to determine whether or not it's like at risk of default. And so like some teams that are like purely informational and research oriented towards like understanding what decisions need to be made and what, how the, to inform voters, like what are the proper parameters and what are the effects of those decisions. That might be like a continuum. Anyway, so that's like sort of the nitty gritty of like how workflow governance is going to work. But again, so in tokenomics, what we want to talk a little bit more about is like, what are these like outflows and what are the inflows? So focus more on their internal governance. Okay. And so right now, like the only thing that we've really identified as like a buy side pressure is this idea of how we're assigning voting power. And that would be like we have a voting escrow contract, and this is where, so we have this voting escrow contract, and we output the token from the token vault, so the token comes out of the token vault, it goes to a user, that user, okay, there we go. That user deposits into the token escrow contract or the voting escrow contract. The token goes back into the token vault to be distributed, and the representative token comes back to the user. So, okay. All right. And then they use this representative token to vote on proposals. And then the other one we were saying is just that like the reward for staking as a vendor should just be maybe this representative contract. So, okay, are there any questions or clarifications there? I'd love to hear people's input on what that means, or any questions to clarify like how that might work.
Okay, Bo, so I understand that token vaults is where the tokens are distributed from to judges, vendors, and all that, whereas the cash vault is where the tokens are distributed to those devs who work on the workflow governance and take decisions for the protocol infrastructure level?
I would say like the thing to think is like the token vault is like we control the monetary supply of the token vault. And like the token vault is something that, yeah, again, we can say like, okay, we want to maybe even print more tokens to incentivize these like activities, which would like drive down the value of the token versus cash, and or would also maybe dilute the power of like governors based on what they had like staked in the voting escrow contract. Whereas the cash vault is where like the proceeds of individual sales, like so the transaction fees are going into the cash vault in the form of like ETH, USDC, and like hard spendable currencies, and then those are being paid like theoretically, you know, like tokens could also become an incentive in the coordinate work stream or workflow. So, but yeah, that's the basic distinction.
Okay, got it.
Well, how about the staking to be like a vendor and for the slashing?
So that's like here. Let's say here is like so that would be this one down here. Like a vendor would stake, and that's I guess like a vendor would stake. I'm trying to figure out where to put this because this is just like a function down here. We have our vendor staking contract. So this is another, I agree, this is like another thing that like that Loadpipe just does. So let's create another. So we have our vendor staking contract. We have a vendor. Now this is a good question, is like, do they stake token or do they stake money? Because in the case that they stake token, if we have to slash their stake, then we have to sell the token on the open market to like make up the difference and like
not necessarily. If we're slashing their token, what we can do is repurpose it and put it back into. I don't think we have this, but like an emissions vault, and so their token feeds into our normal tokenomic or economic design. So
No, because we need to like refund, you know, like USDC or ETH or whatever the dispute, the other dispute party paid with.
I see.
Right?
Yeah.
So like there has to be, we can't just like give them token. We have to like convert it to whatever it is that they like made the payment with initially. And so if the staking contract requires money rather than token, or some combination of token and money, that emission, like, so then it's a question of like, okay, where does the money that they're staking go to? It needs to be held in, well, okay, yeah, I guess we haven't really settled on this question. That creates if it's token, then it creates this like sell pressure in the event that their stake is slashed. Yeah. If it's money,
we would have some sort of like a currency vault or secondary currency vault. That's not to complicate things. I think we'll answer in this conversation. We could potentially.
I can't actually hear what you're saying.
Sorry, I'll type.
Okay. So like, and it also like then just begs this like larger question. So yeah, vendor escrow is a system that also needs to be designed a little bit here, and it is also something that Loadpipe does, right? Right, as opposed to like it's not something Loadpipe decides; it's something Loadpipe does.
Yep. Jose's saying in the chat. I don't know, Jose, if you want to speak that out, but I mean, what do you think, Bo, of actually refunding people in Load token? Maybe we give the customer Load token instead of USDC. I mean, they most likely would sell it, but they might not sell it. But
well, and again, the value of the token individually doesn't necessarily need to go up. A successful token is one where the value in aggregate, I think, goes up. And there is also buy pressure in governing the system, right? So there's buy pressure in governing the system. There's also buy pressure in instantiating a sub-DAO, a marketplace, which goes back to John's different mechanisms of because these are talking about the mechanisms by which a market establishes the vault and what happens to that market's vault, right? So except in this one where vendors and marketplaces sort of exist on the same level. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, John, but I think this one is vendors and marketplaces both get emissions, and I mean, I don't know. We could sort of govern them differently in terms of how leaky their vaults are, but yeah, that is a sort of separate discussion. But that also creates a demand side. So it's not the only demand is not just vendor escrow. It would be vendor escrow if we, require them to stake token, but then it introduces another problem, which is sort of the Oracle problem, which is how, it also introduces volatility risk. So so the Oracle problem is first we need to interpret the value of the token in terms of every supported currency within the system, right? It doesn't know natively what the value of the token is. It can only look at things like the Chainlink Oracle or a Uniswap pool to determine the value in term of the token in terms of Ethereum or USDC, which would allow us to then calculate the maximum allowed escrow amount that an individual vendor can have. Whereas that, I mean, I guess we still have the Oracle problem no matter what if we're limiting the total allowed escrow based on a vendor stake, but it's not as volatile if the required stake is a hard currency like ETH or Wrapped Bitcoin or USDC, right? Because if the value of our token wildly swings, then it wildly changes the amount of things that people can have in escrow, and that's maybe not a desirable property for a vendor, right? If the value of our token goes down quite a bit and they have more locked in escrow than is technically allowed by the system, what happened, right? They just stop being able to make sales until they have to buy more tokens. And I don't know, it's hard when we're saying that that's a core component of the system that vendors must stake. I think we need it to be a little bit more predictable, which is, and I'm just having this thought now. I would love to hear other people's thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, my thought to this is I kind of like the idea of not making it fully required, but transparent, so that the whole community could see how much this vendor has locked up. Maybe it could be an ETH or USDC or Wrapped Bitcoin or Load token, but it would be locked for the minimum amount of time we decide, and then customers or anyone can see how much this vendor has kind of skin in the game or at stake to lose if they're a bad actor. It's kind of rather than making it you have to lock this up in our token or in any token. We basically
you just see that, and I think you were getting at this before. Is this determines a displayed collateralization ratio rather than an collateralization ratio.
Yeah. Okay. It seems kind of cool because it's more Web3-ish, right? Because then you can have people just saying I don't buy. Maybe people could filter on the marketplace by that, or people could recommend that on crypto Twitter, saying I don't buy from people with less than X% or et cetera, et cetera. I think it's a community. I kind of like things to be evolving with the community and just transparent.
So the vendor stake is displayed, and I would say reserved to if they have more than what their escrow amount is, then maybe there should be some I'm just gonna say the vendor stake is displayed to customers. Okay, vendor stake is displayed to customers to let them make their own decisions about the reputation and in terms of their purchase. Could possibly reserve or a stake while open escrow exist to cover outstanding liabilities. Yeah. Okay. And so in that world, like vendor staking contract, like we want to incentivize vendors to stake, right? And so that's why I think like emissions should go to vendors based on their stake. And then where do the underlying tokens go? Maybe they just go to the like swap pool. So like vendor staking contract would function sort of like this, like token and let me grab a hard currency here.
I don't know if everybody agrees. I don't know if everybody agrees dollars is hard money. Jose's being also saying it in the chat.
Yeah. It's representative of a hard currency. It's at least stable. I'll say that.
Well, they say pegged, not stable, but pegged.
Token. Yeah. That is what drives the demand of the token up. Yeah. Okay. How do stable coins reduce volatility? They use financial requirement state token amount equivalent to the value of items or percentage of it. That tends to anchor the value of the token to the value of the merchandise they're selling, and by that proxy to the value of USDT. I mean, yeah, I don't disagree. I don't think that's necessarily wrong. I mean, it depends on like how much excess supply we have in the system, and I think that all comes down to like decisions we make about like team allocation and token vesting and how we deal with like investment and things like that. And then like, this question of like modeling. But again, as Mike was saying, maybe we don't like directly make it a requirement of the system to be fully collateralized. We just like allow people to sort of make their own decisions about like the reputation of sellers.
Yeah.
But in that world, we want to incentivize the vendors to stake to some degree, and then we want to do something with their money, and then we want to emit rewards to them based on their stake.
Agreed.
Ratio. Yes, it all comes down to that. And collateralization ratio depends on the rate at which merchandise vendors sell has a problem, and the stake must be returned to the buyer, like an insurance company paying the insurance. Yeah.
I think I could answer that. So, Jose, I mean, if you're a buyer on here and you see that the seller's staked USDT and you don't think that's a good collateral, and that makes it riskier to you because you don't believe in US dollars, but you see another vendor that staked wrapped Bitcoin or ETH and you believe in that as a stronger hard money that you rely on, you maybe would buy from that vendor versus the other because of that collateral.
Yeah, that's an idea. You could also leave the decision about how much, what the collateralization ratio would be for a certain merchandise to the seller. You understand? So, for example, if I'm selling some edible item that can only be sent but cannot be sent back, there wouldn't be any collateral because it's understood that there's not going to be any returns. I'm not going to make any return on that merchandise. So,
but there would be collateral if it was never delivered in the first place.
Yeah, but then I as a seller could decide the collateralization ratio, and buyers would see if that collateralization ratio would suit them.
I mean, I don't want to open a can of worms, but what if you sold them something that killed them? There's also, you talk about insurance, right? What if it was like a poison food? I mean, it's getting kind of complex, but we are working outside of the normal system, right? So the normal system covers that in insurance and other products. I mean, the fascinating part about this whole thing is that we have to rebuild this whole thing.
From the point of view of the marketplace, Mike, the idea is that the marketplace should get the merchandise delivered to the buyers. I mean, we shouldn't be liable for any other side effects of like what the example that you say.
Well, you say that, but if you look at Amazon, they're liable. If you sell food on Amazon, it's very difficult to sell food on Amazon. You have to have licenses. You have to go through certifications. It's not like it's actually the opposite of what you said about you don't need much liability or collateral because you're selling edible. Edible is very, very risky because it can kill people more easily. Of course, anything can kill somebody, but there's much more it's called product liability insurance. You need product liability insurance. So we don't have this in Web3 that I'm aware of. Maybe there's some kind of product that we could plug in, but I think that's what some of this is trying to solve, I believe. These stakes and this collateral, it's like insurance. Again, we're going into an unknown space. is international. It's etc. But I just thought I don't want to open this can of worms, but that's what this state could represent.
Well, that that sure complicates things.
Well, it complicates it and not complicates it because maybe Hamza could say either marketplace could set the requirement of the stake versus, or the buyer themselves could just decide not to buy from this vendor because they don't feel collateralized enough, right? And then maybe people on crypto Twitter or whatever could say, we feel that the lowest bar we could accept for this kind of product should be X. You know, it's like market dynamics.
But Mike, since you're dealing with international jurisdictions and all that, and that sounds complicated, but maybe Andres could pitch into that. But if a user is harmed or killed by something that he bought on the marketplace, wouldn't any legal action occur outside of the marketplace? I mean, directly between the user and the vendor? Not involving the marketplace?
Again, I don't know if we're probably getting a little bit off topic, but I feel like it's somewhat thought-provoking. Andres is here. Do you have an opinion on that, Andres, or thoughts?
So it depends, guys. It depends. Theoretically, let's say if the marketplace is merely facilitating transactions, it shouldn't be liable. But it depends, how much. Let's say this varies country to country. And it depends, where the person dies and what does the law of that country says about the responsibility of a marketplace, for facilitating that. For example, let's take Amazon as an example in the U.S. Before, Amazon was considered only as a facilitator of the trade. And hence, it was not considered that they were responsible for what vendors sold. Over time, that opinion has changed because Amazon can, to a certain extent, manipulate and control what products get sold against other products. And for that reason and other reasons, now the predominant legal opinion is that Amazon can be sued for the products and there is a precedent in the U.S. courts. If anybody's interested, I can share it with you. But now there is a precedent that where Amazon was sued for allowing something to be sold there. So that's why they are very careful in gating products, etc., because they can be held liable. And that's also why Amazon enforces product liability insurance, so they can protect themselves, by means of insured sellers. So in the case of Loadpipe, for example, or Hamza, let's say, I don't think Hamza can be held responsible because Hamza has to, it depends how how the marketplace sort of promotes products or allows the promotion of products, etc. But the less the marketplace can manipulate and control what is offered, the less it can be held liable. Sorry, I don't know.
Yeah, that pretty much clears up everything. So if Hamza's decentralized and doesn't interfere in the marketplace, then we don't have to deal with that can of worms.
I mean, you can
and remember that these are these are international shipments where one seller in X country is perhaps shipping something to a seller in another country. So it would be hard, in my opinion, to hold the marketplace liable for all these potential, conflicts, etc. So, yeah, also, it would be impossible for Hamza to probably comply with every single law where anybody buys, but it is something to consider, depending on many factors. It's not easy for me to give an answer because it depends in the end, for example, what stimulus or what incentives we offer, where we're going to start offering the products, and then I can look, for example, in one country we're going to sell and see what's the position of that country, with marketplaces, with local marketplaces, for example. Yeah.
Okay.
I cannot answer this because it's a complex issue, but generally speaking, it's what I told you. The more power the marketplace has, over the actors and to influence prices, products, etc., the more likely it is to be held liable. If it's a decentralized platform where sellers actually make their own decisions, which is the idea that I get from what we're trying to do, I think the liability is much less likely to happen or to be enforced.
Yeah. So that's I guess we're a little bit off track maybe, but that's what the idea of the stake means to at least in my mind, is that's like what the seller has as collateral for all of this kind of liability. And as much as I'm a seller, a few of us are sellers, we don't like to deal with this, but I think it makes the buyers more at ease. They don't, we're not trying to be a Silk Road, right? We're trying to have justice. We're trying to have ways to settle these issues. So I think that's what the seller would have like at stake, literally, for disputes. And I think the buyers would like to know that, because I think that they do like that on Amazon or on Web 2 marketplaces. So I do believe Web 3 marketplaces should have some kind of processes, not just say, oh, it's decentralized, it's anonymous, like you don't have any, you're a buyer, you can't really get anything back, etc. I think that's what we're trying to not be. We're trying to give some Web 2 benefits for buyers in this platform.
Yeah, but that would be the whole purpose of the escrow.
Exactly.
Right? That would be the insurance of the buyer.
Yeah. So I don't know if everybody's on the same page, or likes this idea, but basically I think that's what these sellers are locking up, and that's what they could, of course, lose or show their commitments to the community, especially the buyer.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I was talking, the microphone was off. I don't know that the state can, I suppose that that justice is sort of amorphous, right? Doesn't have to necessarily be over, and maybe it is general purpose, right? Maybe it is a dispute can be raised that's hey, this product was harmful or fucked up in some way. It's another thing I've been thinking of recently is how do you allow someone to raise where does the ability to submit that as a proposal place happen, right? What are the users that sort of proposal? But yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's some
vendors, or if that service even exists, or how we would implement it. But I don't know that vendor staking can factor into that, because vendors
I don't know. The rest of the system only really cares about transactions.
I do. I'm not trying. I think maybe it could evolve in that way, though. Could the staking be maybe there's a dApp that somebody builds, somebody in the community, a third-party developer that makes a startup for this and it connects to this and is utilized for that? Is that something we could think about?
Yeah, someone could build a product liability DAO, or could build some sort of product liability fund. But then it's a question of I don't know, product liability. I think to Andres' point, product liability assumes a jurisdiction, right? So when he's talking about the case law against Amazon, I assume that's in the U.S. I don't know where that is, right? And so
in the U.S., correct?
Yeah, exactly. So so that's a U.S. court precedent. So they have the jurisdiction to sue Amazon within the U.S. But then it's because how do you do product liability insurance when say someone has product liability insurance for Argentina?
Well, I think that,
but then they get sued in Colombia.
I think that's that's the beautiful thing. I think what we're building this. We're building our own governments and our own justice, and I think it's kind of hard to imagine. But if this really does take off, we would have product liability insurance program DAO in Argentina and Venezuela.
Guys, just for your information, you can get product liability for world coverage. That's not a problem. We have it in the company that I work for, and that's typically product liability splits in U.S. coverage and the rest of the world. and it's not that expensive for the rest of the world, but the moment you include the US, it goes through the roof. But I'm just saying this because that would be basically for the vendor's protection, right? Like, let's say if they sell a product that can injure someone, then it's typically up to the vendor to protect themselves with this kind of insurance. The marketplace can offer in the same way that Amazon offers vendors, they do facilitate the product liability insurance because it is cheaper if you contract through the Amazon suppliers of insurance, but they're not forced to do it. You know, that's normally the potential liability of the vendor, and whether the vendor wants to protect itself, it's his own decision. However, depending on the type of goods, certain countries can probably ask for insurance, but you know that's up to the seller. But if you want to sell like a medical device or something like that in a marketplace, you might be required by certain laws of certain countries that you have to provide this insurance, right? But you know, we don't know what people are going to sell. We don't know which countries, etc.
Well, I just want to maybe take this back to Bo, and maybe we move on from this on this call. But I don't know, is this a good thing we're discussing? I mean, product liability insurance is a thing. I mean, Amazon sellers have to buy it, and there's third party. I mean, is this maybe not a core feature or a buy side, but could we potentially use this token for that in a roadmap long term?
I have a comment to that, right? Because I think it's helpful, but I don't think we should strive too far away from what we're doing here, right? And many of these options I wrote in the chat as well. These are all good problems to have because they provide opportunities for future community members to develop for themselves. And I think if I'm not, you know, imagining this myself, it seems like what we are going to do here is a justice protocol and a pretty sturdy transaction system, right? And if we start kind of getting caught in I'm not going to call it the small stuff, but these are all great ways for the community to kind of pitch in themselves, right? That's something we can set up in the sidelines when we get closer to, you know, just having an active platform.
I mean, as much as I agree with that in principle, I will say that like that is like when so you'll notice like so I don't know if this makes sense to everyone else, but this is sort of how I like logically have like set up this diagram, and maybe I need to clean up like everything around it. But like for now, this diagram, right? We have Loadpipe DAO. We have the horizontal to it are the decisions that can be made and the things that are owned by it. And I guess maybe like cash and like, and then voting power is what governs, is the meta governance of Loadpipe DAO. Then we have what are the services that it provides below it, right? And it provides those services to sub-DAOs, right? And then these are the genres of decisions that the sub-DAO can make, and then the services that the sub-DAO provides, right? Product liability for vendors, okay? We outlined that a little bit. Marketplace UI, possibly warehousing fulfillment, maybe I'll add another question mark here. But the thing to keep in mind is that we're building this right now, right? Like this is the most immediate thing that we're building. And so, yeah, I as much as I agree, maybe like, you know, again, this is like a tokenomics call. So maybe we shouldn't focus on it as much. I do agree that it was like sort of a good digression and something that maybe was outside of like our view, but like we're building this direction, and all this is like a little bit more long-term, like where do we want to eventually be? But all of this is to ultimately support like the building of this and the incentivizing these people to join this, right? Like that's the goal of like all of this is get these people, vendors, to join these marketplaces. Yeah, this is exactly how I feel. I feel like my diagrams always end up like this, but it is also just this like big complicated system, and you know, we're drilling down into, you know, like some of the more specific places. But I mean, does this construction make sense to people at least?
Yeah, it's amazing. I still have to probably digest it a bit more too, and I think others here. But it's definitely getting much more clear to all of us.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the same, Bo. It's you know, it's a complicated conversation regardless, right? So I think compartmentalizing it makes a lot of sense. And, you know, sometimes we sidetrack with these conversations about liability insurance. I think maybe there's just a box for that, right? Because these factors remain relevant until, fusion. Oh, yeah, you have to perfect. Yeah. So,
But-
exactly.
I still feel like maybe we don't call it product liability insurance, but that's what the staking somewhat represents. If there's a problem with the product, what about a quality control problem? What if the thing breaks after 2 weeks? It's not like maybe they're not. I mean, is that included in this? I mean, where is the line?
I think that is you. Right. I don't know if that's like product liability insurance, because I do think product liability insurance refers specifically to like a court judgment where like someone has been awarded damages by a court within a jurisdiction, and then that person has to pay out fiat currency to like settle a judgment made against him, whereas a dispute within our system, like I mean, it is a good, like, maybe interesting question of like a dispute settlement within our system. Do we make some sort of like, do we add some sort of like clause or box or something like that that says like I absolve? You know, I mean, I don't know how legally tenable like a lot of those things are, but like it would be sort of ridiculous if like a customer went to a dispute and like said I want my money back, and then got it back, and then went and sued. But like also, what happens if like someone what if a product kills someone, right? So and a court decides that it's worth more than what they paid for it.
Sorry, Bo. Just it kind of came to mind. I think a question I'm honestly curious about hearing about this is how much of the value chain do you guys want to take up, right? And if you look at the Amazon value chain from the product's production all the way to the product being in use, what part of that value chain is it that we want to take up? And don't say all of it, because that's not where you start. That's where you end up. And just my comment to this is that it sounds like what we want to do very, very well of that entire value chain is just a transaction.
Well, the idea is it's modular.
Does this make sense?
Yeah, but I guess I don't know if it's deflecting the question, but like I would love to see third-party developers, like you mentioned earlier, that want to tackle certain problems in this process. I mean, it even kind of fits the name Loadpipe. They want to plug in on the supply chain from liability, shipping, etc., into this protocol.
Yeah, that's fine. We can do that, but that's not our first problem to solve, right? I think what Bo has presented here is exactly what we're trying to solve. And as much as I'd love to squeeze more things into it, it becomes a problem that becomes much more complex than it already is. And that's why I'm curious. Like, is everybody on the same page, or
I think
are we doing a lot more than?
I brought that up because we're talking about it in the chat too. But I think I brought up this staking and liability just as an exercise for the demand side of the token, because Bo felt there might not be enough buy side. There must be more sell side. So I brought that up as a buy side variable, not in the short term, but in the long term. That was, I think, why we got on that direction.
I'd just like to say one thing. It's a very complex problem, and a complex problem has to be broken up into digestible parts and solved individually.
Yeah, I second that. And that's also why this doesn't become product liability is for sure a problem, but it might not be ours to solve.
Yeah, like I think, guys, we're kind of confusing terms here, because originally we have, let's say, the marketplace can offer a certain level of protection on behalf of the buyer, and that was the whole idea of the escrow. And then on top of that, the lock-in or the staking of the tokens is I don't think it's meant to be a product liability insurance at all, because a product liability insurance is really for millions of dollars typically. But when we cannot ask a vendor to lock in millions of dollars of worth of tokens. So we cannot confuse one thing with the other. The point of locking tokens or staking them is actually basically on behalf of the seller's reputation. At some point, once we get more granular, we have to decide what is more feasible from the point of view of the marketplace, success. If we should try to push more the escrow because it's more likely to be accepted and more economical for the parties transacting, or push also the staking, because there are benefits that the vendors can get from that. They get different benefits from staking than they get from actually being part of an escrow. If they're part of an escrow, they know they can sell. Maybe small items, whatever, they're able to sell because the buyers, they won't pay too much attention to who is the vendor if there is an escrow account. If there isn't, and maybe we're talking about, building the vendor's reputation, or the vendor can see that they can make money even from the token, then, it's time to discuss the staking with the vendors. But, that they have different purposes. They're not trying to achieve the same thing, the escrow and the product liability and the staking.
Well, and one thing to consider is, as like back to like John's idea of the vault leak, which is like sort of a more general concept, right? Like this staking contract could also have like this stake is kind of a vault that could also leak back to like Loadpipe DAO. It's also a staking contract that could leak, right, to Hamza DAO, for instance. And one thing that is maybe possible, and you see it with, I'm trying to think of Opolis. Opolis is an example of a company that does health insurance and benefits packages for DAOs. And basically it's like they collectively bargain with a health insurance company. It's like mostly for like the US, because everybody else has free insurance or free healthcare more or less. But like in the US, if you have a DAO and you want to give healthcare to like a group of decentralized employees, you use Opolis, who has like, represents multiple DAOs, and they've negotiated with the healthcare companies for like a single rate, right? And so like what we could have theoretically, and this is not like a means to construct it, maybe to demonstrate sort of the power of like DAOs, this Hamza DAO could negotiate with one product liability insurance provider and then just allow vendors to stake and opt in, and then their vault could just like leak, which is the payment to Hamza DAO for their opting into this like collective insurance policy. So that's one possible construction.
I guess the exercise of this is, would that be beneficial to the tokenomics of Loadpipe in that example? I think it would, right? But it might. Would that affect anything with the tokenomics? What you just said?
I mean, I think that would be like maybe money state, because again, it's like, how do you pay for it, right? In terms of like the tokenomics for Loadpipe, again, and again to John's point earlier, right? Like breaking these down into individual pieces. So this is an example of breaking that down into an individual piece, right? We understand that like vendors are getting possibly emissions from the Loadpipe level, and then also from the marketplace level, that's going to the vendor based on some criteria that we set within the vendor staking contract, possibly augmented by whatever stake they have, but definitely influenced by their big R reputation. As we go back to this, right? Reputation factors into like the question of how much, and then it's like, are they getting incentives, or are they leaking back to the treasury? And it's like putting a thumb in the dam, and it's like the leak is less, right? With vendors, I think it's emissions, and with governors, I think it's the leak. So like governors have a decreasing amount of voting power over time, whereas vendors are rewarded with an increasing amount of voting power based on their like good reputation within the system. And so like the basic token flow looks like this, where you have an LP pool that like the underlying capital that the vendor is putting in the staking contract is going into, that is like being, like maintained by the Loadpipe DAO, which has control over a token vault, which is adjusting its position within an LP pool based on maybe some target like value rate. And then that token vault is what is emitting then tokens back to the vendors, right? And similarly, where you have demand with governors to put into the voting escrow contract, their tokens go directly into the voting escrow contract and then directly back into the token vault. They get this representative token, which is leaking power over time, creates this natural demand to control all of these genres of decisions, which means also like you have to have this in order to augment this. But if you're a good vendor,
then you get direct power to like augment this, which also decreases over time, right? And this is a way of like creating demand and putting it back into the ecosystem. And now we just need to do similar things with, which is what like John has done a little bit here with marketplaces, right? Like, what is the reputation for marketplaces, right? What is the reputation, like how do we determine their like distribution? What does their vault type look like? And so maybe that's another one here, like, right here, where we outline what does making a marketplace DAO look like. And then again, we haven't given any thought to warehousing and fulfillment, but then also we need to define these token flows for judges. But this is a simple outline of what like the token flow might look like for vendors. And so, yeah, in terms of breaking down the problem into its different pieces, understanding these as the actors within the ecosystem and the people that we have to play with, and then understanding and then building out these little models of like what do we want to incentivize? How is this slash, right? That we would have to draw some connection here to this dispute resolution process, right? And that's, what happens to the tokens in that case, right? Like there's a lot of like, what should we call it? Like flow charts, right? There's a lot of if-then statements. There's a lot of conditions and so on and so forth. And so, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. People are cool from working with this model. Like I can clean up all of this like ancillary stuff and we can start thinking here. Or if someone has a better suggestion of how to organize these thoughts, then please let me know. But we are at like 15 minutes over our allotted hour.
I think we should.
We made some good progress today, but
I think we made a lot. I think we did well. This is great, Bo. Thank you. I think it seems like we're kind of getting clear. Again, the product liability was just an exercise. I guess I instigated that, but it's a good, healthy exercise, I think. But this is looking solid to me. And yeah, we are 50 minutes over. It is Friday, so.
Oh, thank you. I did want to highlight one thing. So, like, when we were talking about, like, how complicated this is, like, starting to look. Here, hold on. Like, so my favorite project is Hi right now. And Hi is, like, just literally a stablecoin, right? It's controlled peg stablecoin. This is what their, like, governance and, like, there's not many decisions that can be made within the system. It's a governance minimized decision, but this is, like, their flow chart of like what the different smart contracts look like, what the different decision points look like. So these things, and this is like a very good team with a lot of experience in the issue or in the area. And so just like in terms of understanding like how complicated ours looks, this is a good example of, I mean, and you could look at MakerDAO's docs as well, and like how these decision flows works and which smart contracts they flow through, they flow through. Like it is just a complex system that starts to look like a transistor. And so, some complication in the drawing is maybe a bit inevitable.
All right, I think, yeah, of course, this is very complex, and there's so much we can do with this, which I think is a great opportunity, as some percent in chat. So, I think that's a wrap for now, and then we'll get back on track next Friday will be the next session, right, for this. Is there any homework we should do or next steps?
I don't know, like if people want to continue to think about it, right, and make some proposals, feel free. I know we're all like stretched pretty thin, and so like it takes some like focused and thoughtful time, like some focused and blocked off time to really like give it thought. But yeah, I mean, and one of the best ways to do it, I think, is just like either like book a session with me or James, and if you have some idea or thought, like let's just be collaborative about it. And yeah.
All right, thank you, Bo. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Everyone. Take care.
Thank you, guys. All right, bye.